Hi, it's Sierra Miller. I can't wait for you to check out my new collection of shoes and accessories at Designer Shoe Warehouse. If you love shoes as much as I do, then trust me, I got you. From cute sneakerinas to the perfect flip-flops to stunning heels, these shoes are all style, no drama. It's a girl's girl summer, and DSW has just the shoes. Shop the Sierra Miller collection right now at your DSW store or dsw.com.
You think you know the Black Dahlia case, but you don't.
On January 15th, 1947, a body was found in a vacant lot, cut in half. For over 80 years, this victim became known as the Black Dahlia, but her name was Elizabeth Short, and she was a real person, and people loved her.
Today would have been her 102nd birthday. Don't miss this exclusive interview on Partners in True Crime. All right, everybody. Welcome back to Partners in True Crime. And as we've known in the last couple of weeks, we've been diving into the Black Dahlia case. And we have a interesting guest with us today, a very special guest. And Jeff was able to bring her on. And Jeff, I want you to introduce this wonderful woman here.
Not only wonderful, but absolutely beautiful, both on the outside and the inside, and one of the most incredible human beings I have ever met. As we talked about in the previous episode, we made a comment at the very beginning that we did not want to know anything else about the Black Dahlia. We only wanted to know about Elizabeth Short. And that took us back to Medford, where we spent some time in her hometown, talking to folks that knew her and everything. But it was very important to find an individual that was still with us. I hope you don't mind me saying, Mary, because it's becoming fewer and fewer. But we needed to find somebody that knew Elizabeth one-on-one, that knew her personally, that had been friends with her, that knew her a lot more than what the press was pushing for so many years and everything. And it all came down to meeting Mary Pacios. Like I said, just an incredible, wonderful individual. And what I was drawn to Mary right away about is the fact that she cared so much about Elizabeth Short. She wanted the truth to be known about her. She wanted everyone to know who she really was. And she was like-minded like us, wanting to sort of right the ship on who she was versus how she had been portrayed in the press and everything. So Mary was a very natural person. Again, just cared about Elizabeth and wanted to get the truth out. So Mary, without further ado, I'd love to introduce you to everybody. And we can't wait to hear everything that you have to say as well. And I see Lenny DePaul is joining us.
Yes,
Hey,
Lenny.
Lenny.
Thanks for flying in. Thanks for stopping by. We just did a little intro to Mary and Mary. So Mary, so tell us a little bit about yourself and tell us a little bit about how you knew Elizabeth.
Well, I knew her as Betty Short, my friend and neighbor from Medford, Massachusetts, our hometown. Well, she was an inspiration to me. And I am now an artist. I've been an artist for 60, 70 years. And a lot of my work was based on my feelings towards Betty and who she was. Now, I knew Betty. I met her because she went to school with my brother. And when she went to high school, she took practical courses for a woman, typing, shorthand, and I believe some bookkeeping. To say she was beautiful, that's one thing. And she was stunning. She always dressed well. And in those days, if you were leaving the house and going downtown or going to a store for an adult, you dressed up. You wore your best clothes. And Betty was just loved by all the neighbors because she was so friendly. And she talked to everyone, even little children. She talked to the children. If she was visiting with like the neighbor Dot, and Ronnie was with Dot, Betty would include him in the conversation. And I would consider her to be very compassionate, very empathetic towards people.
Yeah. Well, that's really interesting you say that, because, you know, anybody who researches this case and looks at it, I mean, there was someone from the LAPD didn't give her a very good description about her, but what you're telling me sounds like she was a normal, nice, beautiful young woman. So, you know, the way they described her as like a tramp, which it's just very surprising.
Well, what happened with the neighbors, as soon as the first stories came out, they clammed up. Now, Betty would come over to our house and have coffee with my mother, or come over when the band was practicing. My father led a fife and drum corps sponsored by the VFW, post 1012. So the neighbors clammed up, and my mother said, I knew nothing about her. She kept to herself. And that was the position of everyone. And as one member said, they're just looking for dirt. They don't want to know her. And we've put up with it all these years. In 40 years after the murder, there was a article that caught my eye. And in it, the writer said, Elizabeth Short was ideal victim material. She was someone no one would have met. And I thought how much I missed her. And for years, I ignored everything, or tried to, because the one thing I knew is how she treated me. And that's the person I knew.
Yeah.
It's so sad, and it happens so much with cases like this where young women are murdered, and they come up with these taglines and headlines that are just horrifying because it sells newspapers, you know, and it sells a story that maybe the police department wants to go with at the time or whatever. I mean, we've seen this before where young women are just called, oh, she's a drug addict, or she's a prostitute, or nobody will miss her, she's disposable. I mean, that's the thing that really bothers me about this case, is that when we first met Jeff and Kim and Lenny brought us into this mix, it's really, really disturbing that for so many years, no one has ever talked about Elizabeth Short as if she's a human being. It's always been this Black Dahlia myth, which is why we're so happy that you're here today, Mary, because it's really important for people to know that there's a human being behind those headlines, and that you loved her and you missed her, and it was terrifying. Can you tell us when she left Medford? Where was she going? Why was she coming to California? Do you know, like, a little bit about that backstory?
Oh, yeah. Well, she started traveling to get away from the New England winters.
Understandable. I lived in Boston. I get it.
Well, she had a health problem, and winters were very difficult on her. She had been gone in Florida during the tourist season, and she'd work as a waitress. Then she'd come back to Medford. usually came back to Medford twice a year. But her first trip outside was to California. And then she would split her time between going to Florida and going to California. She worked as a hat model, and her aspiration was to break into the movies.
Sure.
And I would say that everyone thought that someday we'd see her photo on the silver screen. The neighborhood druggist called her the sophisticated traveler. And if anyone could make it, thought it would be Betty. The local grocer, Aaron, would see Betty taking me for a walk, and we'd go into the drugstore for ice cream. And he made the comment that she was very good to me. She seemed very good to me. I remember the last time I saw her. We went into, it was the time she saw me sitting on the front stoops, and she was walking by and asked if I wanted to go for a walk with her and keep her company. The thing is, she took me serious. I was the younger of six. My nickname was Pest. Like, here comes the pest. Well, yeah. Well, then they'd start spelling P-E-S-T. So that was the first word I ever learned to spell. But Betty seemed interested in what I had to say. And she never laughed at me, anything I said. And there was one time I thought my parents were really angry with me. And I told her that. And Betty said to me, they're not angry at you. They're worried and concerned. And then she said, why? If I had a little girl, I'd want her to be just like you.
No.
Oh.
I mean, she made me feel wanted. Being the youngest of six in the Depression, I was more like another mouth to feed. And both our families were hard hit during the Depression. During the 1920s, her father was a successful businessman. My father managed a chain of grocery stores. So we were living in a cul-de-sac of poverty, getting government handouts. My mother was able to work in a laundry. Mrs. Short was able to work as a bookkeeper. So you have to think of the background. And during the hard Depression years, she would take me to see a movie. That was the big escape, seeing movies. And a walk with Betty always meant an ice cream cone.
How old were you when you knew Betty?
Between the ages of 5 and 12. When I got to be 9 or 10, probably when I was 5, 6, 7, she'd always ask my mother if she could take me for a walk. And then after that, she'd just see me and invite me to go with her.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you described a completely different person that this LAPD guy described, and I think that has a lot to do with, and we, like Cindy was saying earlier, is that a lot of times these victims get shamed in these horrific crimes, and almost like they put themselves in the situation to to be killed or to be assaulted. And obviously, based upon what you're telling us, and what Jeff has told us, that wasn't the case. I mean, she was an aspiring actress. She was beautiful. She was, as equally as beautiful as some of the stars that during that time. So it's not like I don't know what her career like and what she was. Did she ever tell you afterwards, like when she went to California and she would come back, did she tell you about her escapades in California?
Yes. But she mostly talked to the grown-ups about that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, my father would be sitting on the wall and she'd come down and talk to him, tell him about her latest adventures. I want to bring up one point here. I believe that Betty's murder was used as an example for what happens to a woman who tried to stay independent after World War II. There was massive propaganda about, during the war, the woman behind the man, behind the gun, and women were working everywhere. But as soon as the war was over, they were forced to give up their jobs. And there was one article written at the time, lambasting young women who, and I believe that Betty was used as an example of what happens if you don't go back into the home where you belong.
Wow.
I think you have a very good point, Mary, because a lot of women came to Hollywood after the Great Depression or during the Depression with stars in their eyes to become famous. And Hollywood was a Wild West at that time. I mean, we're talking like it was corrupt, like on a level you probably can't even understand. And a lot of these young girls got sucked into this world here where some of them were becoming famous and making a lot of money and becoming independent. And a lot of people didn't like that. A lot of people didn't like that at all. And I think that you're onto something with that she was using the way that it was worded in a lot of the articles that I've read. It's very, very curious to me why they were so adamant to say these horrific things about a young girl who came to Hollywood like thousands of other young girls, but yet here she's being disparaged after a horrific crime like this. Why? It didn't make sense to me. It never has. I think you're making a very good point. There was a different climate back then that, we don't understand. We weren't alive, most of us, during that time.
You were.
I wasn't.
No, Mary was.
She was. But what I'm saying is that there's something to what you're saying. I think that's a very valid point that should be explored a bit more.
I did a triptych, a print triptych, 6 feet long. There were 3 panels, each 6 feet long, 3 feet wide. And I titled it The Martyrdom of Elizabeth Short. And I had the experience of at a reception of someone looking at and saying, seems familiar to me. And then I said, well, the Black Dahlia murder. The woman immediately stepped back and said, whisper, I wouldn't tell anyone you knew her. And that was in 1987.
Wow.
Wow.
That's how bad. And this was at an art gallery. So at the time, I didn't name it as the Black Dahlia murder. I just made my statement. And as soon as that happened to me, I went back, rewrote my statement, and said, Elizabeth Short, the woman known as the Black Dahlia.
Good for you.
Yeah. And it was
good for you, Mary. That's awesome that you did that.
Well, for years, never talked to anyone about it. And all I can say is I kept that memory of the last time I saw her very deep in my heart.
Yeah.
Would you like to know?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. I was sitting on the stoop. That's 30s lingo, old English for steps on the stoops. And Betty came by, wanted to know if I wanted to take a walk with her. And she was going down to Medford Square. So we crossed the street and I stood beside her as she talked to the manager of the gas station. And they made a date for that night. Then we went to Medford Square and we went into Ruth's dress shop where Betty tried on dresses. And the dress I remember was the last one she tried on. And that was a black dress with rose-colored flowers. I can't remember, but the dress was predominantly the flowers, the black, the background. And then Effie, the sales clerk, said to Betty, "You're lucky. You don't have to wear falsies."
She didn't need any padding up there. Is that what you're saying?
Padding. She was very well built. And frankly, I never saw her in a solid black dress. Her favorite colors were light blue and pink. But she did have a black suit. And every well-dressed woman in those days had a black suit. And hers was collarless, and she'd wear really chiffon blouses. And they'd have like a dickie, ruffles, all ruffles here that would hang over the collarless suit. And I think that's the one she was wearing when she was disappeared.
Wow. Well, I want to go back, and I want to loop Lenny and Jeff in here, and I'm going to talk with Lenny first. Lenny, why do you think? I mean, because we deal with this all the time with these horrible cases and victims, and why do you think a lot of times these victims get shamed in these crimes?
That's a great question, Rob. And excuse my tardiness. I was out running around like a crazy man this morning. Mary, how are you? Good to see you. Jeff, you're not a pest, by the way, Mary. I feel, it's a great question. And listening to Mary, and she pretty much confirmed what I had found out when I got to Medford with Jeff and interviewed a whole lot of people. To include Mary's brother, and to label her, with that crazy, she was, as you said, a tramp. She went to Hollywood. She slept around. She was this, she was that. To be able to interview folks in her hometown, and of course, listening to Mary, completely different description. I mean, like a 360. It was just like not even close to what I have read, what I, had seen, or, documentaries, books, whatever. Not even close to that description, which to me was fascinating. And getting into these interviews in Medford and walking around that town, which is, by the way, I loved it there, Mary. Medford, I was thinking about moving in. It was such a beautiful little town. And everybody knew everybody. So to be able to talk to the historian there and to folks that, had parents that knew Betty, Elizabeth Short, for me was really, important, because I wanted to paint that picture, go back to, as we say, Jump Street, where it all took place, where it all started, and to find out everything about Elizabeth Short that I could. So these interviews that had taken place, the responses that I got from, people that we spoke to, it was fascinating. I just sat there for hours just listening to people talk about how great Betty was, how beautiful she was. She was, meek and mild, and always dressed well and whatnot. And why she ended up in California. One interview we did, this person's mom spoke to Betty and said she was afraid to go back to California. Something was going on. She didn't know what had happened, but she needed to go back, but she was scared to death to do that. And it's just little pieces of the puzzle that, we needed to put together and try to figure out why she left Medford, why she ended up in California. Show me your friends, I'll show you your future kind of thing, who she hung out with. Just a beautiful woman. And again, the history behind her, who she was, who her sisters were, who her mom was, where her dad was on the West Coast. It was fascinating to me to be able to start there in Medford and hear these great stories. I mean, it was Mary's brother, speaking with him. That was a great conversation. It's just the way he painted the picture of her and how he had the hots for her, or she liked him, or something. And then he leaves the room. He says, "Excuse me." He walks out. He walks back in with the yearbook of his graduating year, and he flips it open to a picture of her, and she signed it. And she signed it Betty, Bette. And I was like, where'd that name come from? Well, that's what we called her, Betty. I think it was after Betty Davis.
I was going to say, she spelt it just like Betty Davis.
And I believe that's why she called herself that, Mary. Is that correct? I mean,
yes.
Yeah, that's from what I understand. So anyways, it was great for us to be there and to interview folks that knew her, or at least people who had parents that told great stories about Elizabeth Short.
Yeah. How about you, Jeff? What do you think? What do you think based upon, because we're dealing with it right now with a couple cases where it's like when they can't figure out what happened, and they're just like, well, this person deserved it. Like even in this 1971 article that you sent me, that this guy said she was a man crazy tramp, and she lived day by day and just asked for trouble. Everything that Mary's telling us and Lenny's telling us about this woman's character seems the complete antithesis of that.
It's just infuriating when they write things like this. I mean, and we've seen it so many times. I mean, Molly and Colt, they just did this to Molly, saying, "Oh, she was a drug-addled runaway," and no, she was murdered and dumped in a ravine. So it drives me crazy. And as a journalist for so many years, it really makes me mad, because That's not reporting. That's TMZ. That's sensationalism. Right. So for you, Jeff, walking into this, like, what I'm curious, because like we've all heard Black Dahlia for years. We don't and didn't know under the veil. Like, these stories are amazing that Mary's sharing with us and all the people that you've met. So tell us a little bit about your experience with all of this.
Well, it was interesting. We had that quote right from the get-go. It was one of the first things that we saw. And to give it more perspective, that wasn't just somebody from the LAPD. That was actually Sergeant Harry Hansen of homicide, who was actually one of the lead investigators of Elizabeth Short's case. So when you take a look at that statement, we didn't know anything any different. So we're sort of like, well, that's an interesting thing to say. But as one of the lead investigators in the case, you're essentially just victimizing the victim all over again. What is the point with saying that? And then once we landed on the ground in Medford, we began to get a much different picture. Now, we had worked a couple months leading up to the shoot date that we would be in Medford with John Anderson at the Historical Society in Medford, just putting together interviews, finding people. He was great at reaching out on Facebook, their email database, their phone list and everything. And then, of course, we'd vet all these folks as well, because we wanted to make sure anyone we spoke to had known Elizabeth or had a family member that had really, truly known Elizabeth as well. So we had a booked schedule as soon as we stepped foot in Medford. And it was amazing because we kept on getting phone calls. We kept on getting emails. People kept on reaching out to us, even though we had everything scheduled and the week completely booked up. And we ended up working a ton of overtime because all these people were coming forward saying, hey, I want to get this out. Or, hey, my mother had been friends or had known Elizabeth. I don't want to be on camera. I heard that so many times from different people that we interviewed. I don't want to be on camera. I hate being on camera. But because my mom knew Elizabeth and knew this about Elizabeth, I know my mom would want me to come up, sit down and do this interview and speak in regards to that. So there was a lot of folks that, again, very heartfelt, very touching, very moving. This wasn't just people making stuff up to get on camera, because a lot of them didn't even want to be on camera. They just wanted the truth to finally come out and be known, and pretty much take the words of Harry Hansen and flip them around. And essentially Harry Hansen's words would sort of become the context, the contextual thing we know about Elizabeth that the press was always pushing out. And I totally agree with Mary's prior statement and everything, but it's just so easy to, again, victimize the victim. And then especially when you hang sort of that, cool moniker on it, like the Black Dahlia, it sells papers. It gets attention. It's big business, unfortunately. And that's something we're still seeing happen today. But as as documentary filmmakers, people in the media, we want to get the truth out. We want to combat and push against that, not in terms of like any sales or anything, because we have no skin in this game other than we just want the truth to be known about Elizabeth Short, and we want clarity and truth to be brought forth about what happened with her murder. One of the very first commitments we made at the beginning of this is that we just wanted to see what was done in the dark to be brought into the light. And it didn't matter if we had to drag it there ourselves.
Yeah. What do you think about that, Mary? What do you think about the fact that Jeff and Lenny have basically dove right into this case, and Kim, and is bringing out the truth about Betty, and and what type of person she was, and that she wasn't this live day by day just asking for trouble tramp, which I don't understand how you can kind of encapsulate that just from based upon finding her unfortunately brutally murdered body. I mean, if anything, who deserves that? It's like, even like
no one deserves
that. So
what happened to her is a horrific crime. I mean, it's nothing to be flippant about. And that is a very flippant headline.
I mean, I know this has been a long time for you, Mary, but how do you feel the fact that the truth is finally getting out about Betty?
Well, I think of Betty's mother. I saw an interview of her, and this would have been in the 1980s and late 1980s. And she said, "I'm not one to hold a grudge, but I wish it were all over. And I want to see my daughter exonerated." The thing that I feel right now is that Jeff and his research team, they were the first people who ever approached me, who treated Betty with compassion and respect. So I think with the work they're doing, we're fulfilling Betty's mother's desires. And I think that's it. I'm just, when he first contacted me and wrote a list of all his advisors and talked about wanting an interview, I immediately said yes, and I've turned down a lot. There is one last thing I'd like to say about Betty, and that's about World War II. It was a lonely time, and it was a time for everyone was doing something for the war effort. We had a console radio, top of the line in the 1920s, and it picked up shortwave. So at night, my mother would get on the shortwave, turn the dial to shortwave, and pick up broadcast from Germany. And it was prisoners of war. They weren't supposed to say anything except their name and serial number, dog tag number. But they would give their home address and a message. Well, my mother, my sister Margie would come with my mother, sit with my mother, and my sister Margie would take the messages, add their information down in shorthand, and then transcribe it. And then my mother would write postcards, and we'd get some answers. When Betty was coming home from work and saw the light on, she would come in and she had joined my sister in taking down shorthand and transcribing. She must have been tired after an 8-hour shift. And it would go on to early in the morning.
Wow.
Wow. Another amazing character trait of Betty. But I want to shift a little bit, and I just want to know where do you remember? I'm sure you do remember this, but if you can just kind of recount it for us, where you were when you heard of Betty's death and the way she died.
Well, 2 days before I learned, I came home from school and my mother was reading a newspaper, and she said, "Oh, a woman's body found in a vacant lot, cut in half, in Los Angeles. Isn't that where Betty is?" And I said, no, Betty's in Hollywood. And then 2 days later, I was babysitting my sister's 2 children while she and her husband went to the movies. And I remember checking on them and tipping the toe downstairs, and I was going to watch television. Now, my brother-in-law was an electrical contractor, and he had bought the first television in the city of Stoneham. It was the only one. It was one where the neighbors would come over and watch. It had a small screen, and I sat down, turned on the television, and they were running really old cowboy movies with the tall hats. And all of a sudden, I saw Betty's face. And I said, it's Betty's face there. And then I heard it. And everything sounded like it was in an echo. Body discovered, identified. Elizabeth Short from Medford. And I sat there frozen. I mean, I couldn't cry, couldn't laugh. I just was frozen. And then, I don't know how long it was, the door opened and my sister and her husband came in, and I immediately ran to them yelling, it's Betty, they've killed Betty. And I just want to tell you one thing.
I'm sorry, what did you say? Can you repeat that, please? We couldn't hear you. Can you say that again?
Oh, I just want to tell one incident that happened a couple of days afterwards with my father. I was at the table drawing a picture of Betty, as Snow White. And my father was sitting over in the chair reading the newspaper. And all of a sudden, I heard the newspaper drop, and I heard my father let out a big sigh. I looked up, and for an instant, our eyes met. And the pain and the sadness we both felt were in those eyes. Then he turned away, but I could see there were tears. And this is a time when men did not cry. So that has stayed with me for years, that moment.
And I'm sure shockwaves went throughout Medford, Massachusetts as well.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, the neighbors clammed up. At first, they spoke to the reporters, and the reporters hovered out front, and they hovered in my aunt's backyard, because from my aunt's backyard, you could see the top floor and the porch, the Shorts' porch. They lived in a triple deck. Well, my aunt couldn't get rid of them. I mean, she'd shoo them off, they'd come right back. Just ignored her. And then I remember my mother saying Betty kept to herself. We know nothing. I know nothing. Betty was over our house a lot. And all the neighbors clammed up. And I tried to ignore the newspaper articles that were coming out. And that wasn't Betty.
Yeah.
That wasn't the Betty Short I knew. And I kept the memory of our last time together riveted in my heart.
Yeah.
I
That's horrible.
only knew how good she was to me.
Of course. Jeff, do you recall, anything from people in LA that knew her, that spoke to her character as well? Did you find anybody, or?
I would no, not really. We didn't really find a lot of people from LA, but I do want to go back to that comment by Harry Hansen, the lead detective.
Sure.
Because again, why would you put a statement out like that? And it does pertain to what you just asked me as well. And that is one thing we have to keep in mind here is sort of like the male gaze, the male perspective on all this, is that a lot of the ways that they came up with her character was through an address book that had been mailed back to the police and the press. And they went through that and found the names of a lot of different individuals that were men that she knew. So now, if you remember what Mary said at the very beginning of the conversation when they asked people in Medford what they thought, a lot of people clammed up and had nothing to say. Now, consider yourself a young man in Los Angeles whose name now appeared in the address book of this woman who was brutally murdered. And the police come knocking on your door. I want to know this, this, and this. Why is your name in her address book? Well, a lot of times these guys are going to give disparaging comments. Well, I didn't really know her, or she was this, or she was this. So a lot of what Harry Hansen was saying came from what a lot of the guys that they talked to that either knew her or were acquaintances and everything. And again, think about it being filtered through that male perspective, but also through the filter of, if I say anything wrong, am I going to be pulled into the case? Is this going to implement me at all? A lot of people wanted to be hands off. A lot of people just didn't want to say anything because they were afraid, especially the attention and everything. Some people even went so far as changing their names because of all the harassment from the press and everything. But the point is, it gets filtered through a couple different things that totally changes and warps the perspective on who Elizabeth truly was.
Yeah.
Yes.
Does
Mary.
does that address book still exist?
No, it does not. It does not. We learned that it had been the pages that were still there. Keep in mind, it was an address book that was 400 pages thick. Over 100 pages had been sliced out with a fine surgical instrument. The other pages, from what we understand, no. There is no physical evidence left in the Elizabeth Short murder case other than a stamp that supposedly the killer licked. Everything has been lost or destroyed or just turned up missing.
Did you want to say something, Mary?
Yes. In the late 80s, I spoke with Nina Blanchard through a friend, put me in contact with her. And before she talked to me, she grilled me. She had to know that I was truly a friend from the hometown. And then she said, these are quotes. Well, she was working, she was in high school, and she was working at Brittingham's. And at the time, Brittingham's was never mentioned in the newspapers. Afterwards, it was. And she said, we knew she wasn't a hooker. She'd come in and she'd have coffee and she'd sit down and talk to the people sitting next to her. And there was a rumor that she was going with someone over at Columbia Studios with the name, she didn't have a name. She just had an initial, M. Now, the sitting at the counter and talking to the people next to her, that's what she did in Medford. That's what she did. She'd visit my sister, who was working a counter in Boston, and Betty would sit there and she'd talk to the people next to her, waiting for my sister to get off her shift.
Well,
That's
back
crazy.
then,
Can I just jump in real quick and
Yeah,
put
how-
this in perspective?
Jump in there. Yeah.
Let's get in Betty's shoes for a second. You got a drop dead gorgeous woman from a one horse town in Medford, Massachusetts, who decides to go to Hollywood. Okay. She heads out there. Mary, perfect description. She enjoyed conversation with people. She doesn't know any better. She gets out to Hollywood, and there are a bunch of vultures out there in the 40s. Okay. What are they going to do with this absolutely stunning person who is very naive, knows nothing, but likes to talk to a lot of people? They're going to suck her into these groups. And I know I'm singing to the choir, but I can only imagine being in Betty's shoes, what she encountered and who she had met once she hit the Hollywood area back in the 40s. So they were all over her like a cheap suit. And unfortunately, you know, again, show me your friends, I'll show you your future. Did she get hooked up with some bad people? Probably. I mean, they were vultures. I mean, they saw her coming. Perfect target from my perspective.
Yeah.
Knows nothing, right?
Yeah.
You know, let's suck her into this group. Let's do this. You can earn money here while you're trying to be this big time actress like Betty Davis or whatever. So, you know, here comes the cops after the homicide. Who are they going to interview? They're going to interview these vultures, these people that, oh yeah, she came in from a small town and she did this and this how she made money and blah, 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 blah. I can only imagine what went on and the conversations that were had, you know, back in the day. You know what I mean?
Yeah. What do you think, Jeff?
No, I absolutely agree. Like I said, you know, a lot of this is formulated on the male perspective. People that, again, we're wondering how could they possibly be implemented in this? So absolutely. And unfortunately, it's warped and contorted what the truth is and has prohibited this woman from seeing justice, not only in terms of her reputation, but also I believe that affected the investigation as well.
absolutely.
I mean, people that came into our investigation in California, they didn't go to church every Sunday. I mean, these guys were, you know, shysters, gangsters, whatever. I mean, that was the crew back in the 40s, from what I understand. And they, you know, Hollywood was, you know, there was organized crime being stood up. There were well-known figures out there, had their fingers on the pulse and the money and whatnot. So, you know, here comes Betty, like I said, naive from the East Coast, drop dead gorgeous, drop her into the middle of all this. And here they come, you know, come here, stay with me, do this, do that. We'll make you a star. And
Exactly. It's the promises that lure them in. It's the promises.
It happened in the 90s when I came here.
It happens.
I mean,
still happens.
it hasn't changed.
Yeah, it happened to me and I still have gone nowhere. So there you go.
Mary, do you have any theories about what you think happened to her?
I'm very open.
Yeah.
I'm just very open.
Yeah.
There's so many possibilities.
Mm-hmm. When she was afraid to come back to California, she never said anything to anybody about why?
No. she wrote letters to her mother every week, and everything was fine and wonderful. And when she went to San Diego, she was working at the Navy hospital. And all that, the fact that she was painting a beautiful picture to his mother was written up as her being devious. Everyone wrote good news back to their parents.
Exactly. Yeah. So you don't think if there was something going on, she wouldn't have told her parents in the letters?
No. I don't know if she would have told anyone. She was very self-confident, and she was adept at sending off passes from men.
I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, and well, that's what I have to say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Jeff, not to put you on the spot, Jeff, but have you shared any of your research with Mary yet, as far as what you guys have found, or are you waiting?
We have shared a few things, and believe me, in order to share everything would take a tremendous amount of time. So we've been able to uncover so much stuff. But we've gone through some of the brief highlights with her and everything, just to let her know the trail that we're on and where we're going.
Yeah. What do you think about that, Mary? What do you think about after all of this time? Because, I think her, Betty's, her birthday's either coming up or here, and she, I believe she would have been 102 as of today. So what do you think Mary, looking down from heaven, would think about what?
No, you said Mary.
I'm sorry, Betty, looking down from heaven, would think about what this team is doing?
I think she'd be impressed at the depth of their research. And I think she'd say it's about time someone did. I have the confidence that this is going to be the definitive work on the Black Dahlia murder. And as I said, and I think Bid would agree, that these people are approaching the circumstances with compassion and respect. And for Betty would say, as I deserve.
Wow.
All about truth, logic, and common sense, Mary.
You just gave me chills, Mary.
Yeah, I thank you so much for sharing your story with us about this, because people need to know the truth. People need to know that this is a human being and her life was swiped away from her. She's not some mythological figure, Black Dahlia. She was a human.
Yeah. And for you and your stories just kind of illustrate all of the goodness and greatness in Betty, and the fact that you can do that and illuminate the world on what she was really like. Because, these old news articles, they didn't know her. They didn't know her like you did. So it's like, how could they possibly come up with these concoctions of descriptions of a person that when they found them and they encountered him, was brutally murdered. So it's like you're speaking for Betty, you're speaking for her spirit, and we appreciate you coming on and sharing that with us. And we look forward to this team, to Jeff, Lenny, and Kimberly, who've put a lot on the line here, because we've done these cases before. You're putting everything on the line here, going through these research and hunting this stuff and putting your reputation on the line. And so they're doing God's work, and hopefully this will all come to an end soon.
It's definitely a collective effort, like you said, Rob, Cindy, with Jeff and Kim, and then the team that's out there, from all walks of life and law enforcement community, from Teresa Payton, intel analyst, to whoever. A lot going on, and there's a lot of stuff coming together. The puzzle's being put together, the dots are being connected, and thanks to folks like Mary, who has a whole lot of information and painted a gorgeous picture of Elizabeth Short. And
absolutely.
Yeah,
and Jeff, to you and Kimberly specifically, because as fellow documentary filmmakers like Rob and I, it's very impressive the amount of work that you guys have done, but also how you've come at this with such compassion. And I think that that's why you're getting the answers that need to be told. So you guys have done an amazing job.
Yeah.
And thank you for sharing this with us. It's been an incredible story.
Your recall of some of these stories is phenomenal. I mean, it's like you really painted an amazing picture, and about Betty in that time period, and putting it in perspective, like just the fact that women coming back after the war were basically told to go back home and be mothers and stay in the kitchen, but there was quite a few of them that didn't do that, and Betty was one of them, and she just she had that independent spirit. She wanted to attain her goals, and you just honored her the best way you possibly could,
especially today on her birthday. So
yes.
Thank you so much.